Penuel the Black Pen has deployed a very wonderful trick in the South African digital world. Amongst being a writer and a very published one at that, he is also the most recognizable skeptic in the South African intellectual sphere. But Penuel is a self-proclaimed narcissist, and aside from that, Penuel is a reductionist of the lowest order. A reductionist is someone who analyzes and describes a complex phenomenon in terms of its simple and fundamental constituents. He is a reductionist of the lowest order because he often fails to discern the actual fundamental constituents. This accusation can be justified by this Penuel tweet that serves as a critique of religion. Ediwe argues that his self-proclaimed narcissism explains his reductionist views on the world, because a narcissist can only meditate on what is self-serving. But matters such as religion and politics tend to be larger than that narrow sphere, hence why he trips and falls into such logical fallacies when arguing against religion. Penuel's attitude towards religion, even with his intellectual reputation amongst the South African youth, can be best described by this G.K. Chesterton quote. The heretic says with a conscious laugh, "Suppose I am very heretical," and looks around for applause. Penuel seeks to take identity into his own hands, to strip himself and others of unproductive traditional convictions such as those found in organized religion. This, he surprisingly supposes, makes him a deity, the end and the beginning of his moral order. He says that he is appreciative of the dismantling of traditions and cultural norms that the world is going through, and seeks the establishment of subjective order, and argues that his religion, penuelism, established in 2018, is the best way of going about this rebellion. The ideology of penuelism may be described plainly in his book review. The mind is the most powerful force in your world. How it lives off perception and is influenced by whoever you choose to outsource your thinking to. You are the god of your life. You are fully in control of your life and mind. The purpose of life is to live, be in the present, and minimize living in the past or anticipating the future. It's about living now. Life may be about love, maybe helping others, maybe trying your best, maybe pursuing happiness, maybe changing the world, but mostly just living. Be present in your life, own your life, enjoy the good and learn from the bad. Now here's a great example of Penuel's pro-reductionism. He claims that religion is a tool of the rich and elite, who use it to suppress human beings from revolting by promising them an afterlife of joys and riches. Here's the tweet. Also arguing that orthodox religions are incapable of finding a place in modern man because of quote-unquote their outdated practices. Claiming that religion is false, outdated, and is holding people from achieving their greatest potential.
Look, the Bible, the Quran, the Torah is outdated, and we would like to alter it moving forward. People hold on to orthodoxy and tradition even when it is destructive to the self, to the family, and to the community at large. So penuelism is trying to fix some of those things.
He believes that many religious traditions are man-made constructs created to control or suppress people, rather than true reflections of ultimate spiritual reality. Signaling out reason and owning your mind is the first step of freeing yourself from these dogmas. Genesis chapter 3, the apple of good and evil, the snake. I hope that rings a bell in your mind. And contrary to the secular interpretation, when the serpent offers Adam and Eve the fruit, it does not offer them the discernment of good and bad. They had that already. What he offers them is a self-invented value system, deciding identity separate from the Father, who is an accurate representation of the conventional moral order that the serpent is attempting to usurp. For this reason, Penuel, being raised Catholic, should know that this story ends in death. Not merely a decomposition of flesh, but death in this sense.
We have a kind of origin story for death. The clue is in the idea of dust. The idea is that now you will become dust. Now, what does it mean to become dust? First of all, what is dust? Dust is basically an amass of things that have no relationship with each other. God gathers the dust together, all these dispersed elements, and then he puts a spirit in it. He puts a breath in it. He puts heaven inside. He puts a name inside. He puts meaning inside. He puts purpose inside. All the things that are invisible patterns that legislate dispersed elements, he puts that in this gathering of dust, and now the dust is animated. Now is no longer dust, but is one being, even though it's still made of dust. And so this is the difference between life and death, is the difference between unity, which contains multiplicity, and multiplicity, which no longer has unity, bringing it together.
In other words, Penuel isn't struggling to become a god. He's aiming to embody the serpent, Penuel the serpent. And if he believes in the serpent as little as he claims to believe in God, which is not at all, then I do think that this label is more fitting for him. Now, Penuel's fruit is packaged in owning your mind as the highest form of being, much like that was being offered to Mother Eve. Self-reliance and self-referencing is on offer to us. And if that apple is too hard to chew, then he offers us the next best option, which is to follow a leader who actually owns their mind.
Is this true? Is this not? Is this good for me? Is it not? Very, very deep concept, but owning your mind is one of the principles of penuelism.
What owning your mind means in penuelism is the ability to self-determine through self-invention. This, Penuel says, should suit the ever-shifting landscapes of modern conditions and take us beyond traditional dogma. His dogmatic contempt for dogma is how he arrives at this flexible and malleable religion. Thus he seeks the removal of people from dogmas and to evangelize them into his religion of purposeful nihilism. He intends on making us more open-minded, hoping that it would result in us being more willful to move civilization forward without dogmas. To succeed in building this post-Christian secular society, Penuel must manufacture faddist values like they are seasonal fashion, and pray, no, rather hope. Hope that modern civilization will stand on those shoulders. Penuel's stance on religious dogma and dogma in general shows that Penuel is a larger misunderstanding of human beings embedded in penuelism, because he views neutrality as a form of progress. In fact, Chesterton said it better than I. The vice of the modern notion of mental progress is that it is always something concerned with the breaking of bonds, the effacing of boundaries, the casting away of dogmas. But if there be such a thing as mental growth, it must mean the growth into more definite convictions, into more and more dogmas. The human brain is a machine for coming into conclusions. If it cannot come to conclusions, it is rusty. And if this 21st century man appreciates rationality the way he says he does, then he will not leave the land to live in the seas. Most of them leave religion for a worship of science or hedonism. But Penuel does this. He calls people to live in the seas. He tells people to decide not to decide. If this is a religion, then it's not for human beings. Because dogma, which is a set of principles or beliefs that are accepted as authoritative, incontrovertible, and often unquestionable, particularly within religious, philosophical, or ideological contexts, is as human being as breathing. According to Penuel, to decide about how kids should be raised is critical thinking, but to decide about morality is dogmatic. And Penuel accepts this first one, but not the second one, because Penuel wants us to conclude about something, but he does not want us to conclude about everything. Which brings us to this question: who is actually close-minded? Penuel extends this perspective to the cornerstone of civilization, by urging us to reconsider the boundaries that traditional dogmas have imposed on sexual expression. He suggests that there might be room for homosexuals, for same-sex marriages, and for the sexually promiscuous nature of our modern world.
Remove and scrap some of these things. I see the same thing happening in African traditional customs where we refuse to morph and transform and change with time. Easy example is something like homosexuality. The custodians of African customs, the custodians of religion refuse to sit down and actually say, look, the Bible, the Quran, the Torah is outdated and we would like to alter it.
However, this viewpoint overlooks the empirical evidence that speaks against such practices, their long-term effects on participants and their detrimental impact on child rearing. Beyond the practical advantages and functional purpose of conservative sexual expression, rejecting sexual practices outside of marriage can also be supported by this Chesterton quote: "The home is the one place in all this world where man can be both human and divine." The introduction of these practices into culture and religion undermines the very foundation of the institution. To surrender this institution is both ethically and empirically misguided, and it disregards the truth of Christ, the bridegroom returning for his bride at the end of time. It disregards our imitation of the end of days. This is how intertwined the pillars of our religion are. Allowing homosexuality to infiltrate this sacred system undermines the entire Christian narrative. You cannot have the rose without the thorns. You cannot have the ideal and not the responsibility of creating the boundaries that allow the ideal to exist. Hence, contrary to the secular inclination, marriage is still just between a man and his wife. Furthermore, how much room does he think is enough room? Perhaps pedophiles would feel hard done by the lack of recognition that they receive. Should we extend the boundaries further? Because the good man is not one without any biases or prejudices. The good man is one with his prejudices in correct order on the moral hierarchy. For if he does not acquire and acknowledge his prejudices, then he becomes parasitic, feeding on anything indiscriminately. Aside from being irrelevant and socially outdated, Penuel claims that there is a lack in these ancient religious doctrines, specifically as it pertains to wellness. Penuel laments, why oh why have these writers of this old religious text have not said that we should do 10 push-ups first thing in the morning?
Penuelism speaks about healthy living, which is one of the things a lot of these holy scriptures don't touch on. What am I supposed to be doing? You're meant to be walking, running for at least 30 minutes a day or 5 kilometers. Where you see a lift, ask, are there stairs? And climb the stairs.
Corinthians 6 verse 19 to 20. We know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God. You are not your own, you are bought at the price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies. Through this verse, one may clearly see that the Bible is not an instruction manual. It is a teleological narrative outlining for how God reaches out to humanity and the various responses to that prompt. Teleology, relating to or involving the explanation of phenomena in terms of their purpose they serve rather than of the cause by which they arise. Therefore, push-ups are good. Good if you use them to live longer, bad if you want to be strong enough to kill a village. The ideals that we pursue are the primary concerns of the Christian narrative. And if emphasis is Penuel's problem, then it further cements that we live in two completely different worlds. Ediwe likens Penuel as South Africa's very own mini-Nietzsche. His rhetoric reflects the idea that everything is power struggle, and duality is its template. According to him, you are either controller or controlled, master or slave. So he bases his philosophy on this premise. The man could be given if he was actually to be a devout Nietzscheist, because he would be wrong, but at least sincere. Nietzsche is best known for his critiques of traditional morality, religion and societal norms, as well as for concepts like the Ubermensch, overman or superman, the will to power, and the proclamation that God is dead. The Ubermensch is the man who creates his own values and ideals, independent of any constraints of good and bad. Morality is a village and it tramples over you to serve his own desires. The Ubermensch is a participator in active nihilism. Like Penuel, he declares a meaningless world and seeks to create his own meaning in it, to no avail. Unlike Penuel, Nietzsche is a cognizant writer. He knew that the species he was trying to build had nothing to do with God, the very opposite. Hence, Nietzsche named himself the Antichrist. Nietzsche was the philosopher of Nazi Germany, who used the Ubermensch concept to justify atrocities against the Jews. His philosophy centered around the dismantling of traditional Christian morality, led to the death of millions of people.
And then even the Nazi party activists and politicians, Goebbels had a PhD, drew explicitly right, from Nietzsche, also from Karl Marx, interestingly. Hitler had a bust of the works of Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche scholars and Nietzsche himself would say that they would be horrified by many of the things that the National Socialists did. But at the same time, the National Socialists thought themselves as disciples of not only Nietzsche, but significantly Nietzsche.
Nietzsche's idea was that human beings were going to have to create their own values, essentially. Now, he understood that we had bodies and that we had motivations and emotions, like he was a romantic thinker in some sense, but way ahead of his time, because he knew that our capacity to think wasn't some free-floating soul, but was embedded in our physiology, constrained by our emotions, shaped by our motivations, shaped by our body. He understood that. but he still believed that the only possible way out of the problem would be for human beings themselves to become something akin to God and to create their own values. He talked about the person who could create their own values as the overman or the superman, and that was one of the parts of Nietzschean philosophy that the Nazis, I would say, took out of context and used to fuel their, superior man ideology.
I do not mean that Nietzsche takes responsibility of the actions of Hitler, but he does take partial responsibility for his ideology. Because you might blame Hitler for neglecting some elements of Nietzsche's writings, but you cannot blame him for attempting to go beyond good and evil, beyond the Judeo-Christian moral order, where murder is not good or bad, but mere perspective, resulting in the death of 6 million Jews at the altar of the Aryan race. The straw man to religion as seen in this post was not meant to convince anyone. These people will smirk at the religious folks in the room because the ideals that they are following are individualistic convictions and are relevant, whereas ours are collective and ancient. Somehow, even in how I expressed this statement, I am still confused as to why are we the ones who are supposed to be embarrassed. Penuel describing his beliefs as relevant to the times. Penuelism is relevant to the times. The Roman Catholic Church is relevant to all times, as G.K. Chesterton says. The Catholic Church is the only thing that saves a man from the degrading slavery of being a child of his age. Penuel has been running in place. His emphasis on individual value is a byproduct of a dogmatically individualistic society. The end goal of this religion is infancy. You will have people following their ideals younger than them, sometimes for the very fact that they are younger than them.
Similarly, some of the stuff in old is no longer relevant, but unfortunately, the custodians of most of the religious groups refuse to change and alter and remove and scrap some of these things.
This is his attempt at protecting the belief that being free from traditional dogma is owning a mind, which is a fallacy that assumes that individual self-determination is not a dogma, let alone modern. And since Penuel has not, in my experience, with his content, claimed to have consciously given himself to Nietzsche, then his light-hearted attempt to become a god does become laughable. One day he will tell us to stop what we are doing and follow the person that we deem fit to be a leader. Then he'll play the Karl Marx card and tell us we should stop following religions, because they are a power play. How Penuel thinks that these things are not related is surprising. I mean, if he thinks that following a man is virtuous, whereas traditional religion is foolish, then I suggest that he does not know why people follow him. In the Christian tradition, God speaks the world into existence. Now, Penuel believes this, but he restrains this narrative to the narrow sphere of his self-inventing ideological system, because he loosely holds the same belief, but only in regard to the creation of his subjective world. Penuel suggests that because we are entities on a path to build our own subjective system, truth does not exist as traditionally understood. Rather, Penuel holds the reductionist view that our notion of truth are just convincing arguments, nothing more.
Lies and truth is number 3. The concept of lies and truth, that not everything is a fact. Fact is actually an opinion that has just been sold really, really well.
But unsurprisingly, this denial of objective truth or subjective order serves as a rejection of Penuelism. Take it even and Penuel walk into a bar. The bartender gets 2 beers for which Penuel proceeds to pay for, and then the bartender reaches out his hand and signals for payment again. Penuel looks puzzled and insists that he has paid. The bartender looks at him and tells him that he's not convinced. Idibe insists that they check the CCTV footage, and voila, Penuel paid. The bartender looks at Penuel and denies the CCTV footage. The Penuelist has no basis to call the bartender a liar, because lies only exist in relation to truth, and truth does not exist in Penuelism. I, for one, am sure that it is not true, but he cannot say whether the statement is true or false. He can only say whether it's unconvincing, very convincing, or something within that spectrum. But even that does not make sense. Is it true that it is convincing, or is it convincingly convincing? Which highlights the self-undermining nature of his argument. Do you see what I'm painting with this picture? Penuel the Black Pen is underneath what is called the self-defeating paradox, which occurs when a statement contradicts itself, rendering it logically untenable. In essence, Penuel just said, this statement is false. It is through this reasoning Penuel attempts to strip identity of truth, failing to consider that even the act of questioning or challenging truth presupposes the existence of some form of truth, which also undermines the metaphorical aspects of his ideology. Animalism is a philosophical theory of personal identity that asserts humans as fundamentally animals. Penuel's proponent of animalism stems from his desire to remove us from societal and institutional constraints. This principle of penuelism is one that Penuel highlights as essential to his ideology. Penuelistic animalism commands us to abandon human stereotypes and seek the animal in each person. The brave-hearted are known as lions, those who are shy as sheep, and those that are cunning are likened to snakes. In this, Penuel also neglects the collective personification of these types of names, and their dependence on a mutual understanding of aggression, a mutual interpretation of the personality on the lion. He fails to recognize that these very traits are imbued with culturally constructed meanings that shape our interactions and identities, and that he is an inheritor of personified truth. His philosophy has a poor understanding of human beings. Penuelist's accusations about people seeing meaning in their suffering being a hindrance results in him having an adversarial understanding of their relationship to faith, and particularly the faith that religious people have in these doctrinal assertions. I would like to preface this argument as so. Faith isn't just intellectual belief in certain doctrines, but a participatory reality. It's an active engagement with the world, a process by which a person aligns themselves with the divine order, the Logos. Now, faith in its highest form is about living in harmony with the divine, not this.
Because one of the hacks that the people that came up with religion discovered was this concept of faith, this believing without seeing. The whole concept is premised on you either believe or you don't. And because of that, it allows them to play around with your mind in a crazy way. It's like saying there are aliens out there. Just for the fact that you haven't seen them doesn't mean they're not there. You either believe or you don't. And it's literally that. So
Penuel states that faith and beliefs are words that rely on invisibility. Now, fortunately, he's correct, according to Hebrews 11, verse 1. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Penuel regrettably and mistakenly thinks that faith is a religion, and that he is not subject to it. He holds rationality as the highest form of virtue, but does not realize that rationality is impossible without faith. G.K. Chesterton states, "It is idle to talk always of the alternative of reason and faith. Reason itself is a matter of faith. It is an act of faith to assert that our thoughts have any relation to reality at all." Both believers and Penuelists take a leap of faith. The latter just slips into his own hands. Believers hold this promise in spite of our suffering, not because we have a fear of living without our indoctrination, but because we recognize that faith is a shadow that follows us. To put in Christ is to give it a home. As to these accusations against the writers of the Bible, I have nothing to say.
Well, what's the plan?
Well, as you know, Jesus is dead. But stick with me, okay? Stick with me. I have a plan. We are going to steal his body.
Okay, I'm tracking with you. What's next?
And then we're going to tell the whole world that he rose from the dead.
Oh, you know I'm in.
I love it already.
All right, classic. Then what?
And then we're all going to get brutally murdered.
Cynicism towards the origins of the Bible stem from Penuel's belief that not only does God not exist, but if he does, he's evil mantra. And I would not sleep well if I were to ignore his misconceptions of the Christian problem of evil.
the Christian God, with the civilization and education we've been indoctrinated into, is so highly flawed, which is what made me leave Christianity. Drowning the world with the floods, Zanoah. Murdering the firstborn sons of Egyptians because they won't release the Israelites. Arm wrestling with Satan over Job and causing Job so much pain. Sending his only son to get crucified by the world. This cannot be a good being. And when people are going to call me out on a business failure, compared to someone who drowned the world that he created because the people are no longer licking his toes. What kind of a God is that? What kind of a loving God is that? No, but it's the Old Testament. Fuck. You want to tell me Old Testament, New Testament so that your story holds water? That's bullshit to me. But if I don't take it literally, I'm like, look.
I will not attend the claims on a case-by-case basis, but rather take them into totality. The seemingly arbitrary nature of God's judgmental providence is what serves as the biggest problem for Penuel with the Christian God. This conviction is deeply misinformed. The Christian faith, especially on the level of biblical interpretation, can be viewed as a narrative teleology, which is the idea that stories and historical events are often interpreted and understood as having a purposeful direction or end goal. Penuel interprets the purpose of the events in these biblical narratives as moving towards satisfaction of a deeply despicable God. However, the Christian narrative reflects not an arbitrary malevolent deity, but the unfolding of a deeper purposeful union between being and intelligibility. In this view, the events in the Bible, while seemingly harsh or unjust, are not arbitrary acts of cruelty. Instead, they are a part of a co-created history where humans, bound by their limited perspective, often struggle to fully grasp the divine plan of God. Now, in this limited perspective, we are subject to Penuel's grave mistake. Separating God from morality, rather, I suppose, the foundation of morality, cannot be morality itself, but it is God. To confuse the two is to misunderstand the very nature of existence and divine providence. Morality is not an independent standard by which God can be judged. Morality, in its truest sense, is rooted in the character of God, who embodies goodness, truth, and beauty, rather than being an independent or arbitrary construct. Therefore, God is a moral agent and the source of morality itself, meaning that morality is at its foundation the acting of the divine will. To accuse God of immorality is to assume a moral standard devoid of God, and Penuel has yet to provide one. The trials and tribulations faced by figures like Job, for instance, can be understood as a part of divine narrative that invites deeper exploration of faith, trust, and the complexities of human existence within a world marked by both potential and suffering. In this light, the perceived harshness of God's providence can be reconciled with a profound trust in His goodness, as we recognize that even the most challenging experiences are integral to the unfolding of a greater redemptive story. Hence, God's question to Job, "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation?" The narrative of the necessity of suffering can be outlined at the local level. Penuel regularly endures the pain of bicep curls at the gym, accepting this suffering for the higher goal of fitness. He sees validity in this form of suffering because he views humans as ultimate sources of morality and the highest moral agents. To him, humans do not become gods, they already are. Thus, the involuntary suffering that people endure is not just seen as a product of evil from a god he doesn't believe in, but as a transgression against the very gods he does believe in. Before we conclude, if Penuel thinks that Christians say grace for the sake of purchasing a ticket to an afterlife utopia, then he is mistaken, just for the simple reason that the kingdom of God is at hand. Penuel believes that religions are self-help programs, thus he has designed his very own. This misunderstanding comes from a denial of what is transcendent, a denial of anything above human consciousness, of which stems from his inflated sense of self, resulting in him skeptical of those who wrote the Bible, because clearly human beings cannot help but act selfishly. Like Nietzsche and the many men before him, he attempts to free himself from the conventional. Only he cannot get free but tricks a whole generation into thinking that this is a noble task, manufacturing a generation of people who just won't plant trees and who will not own their own mind, because they won't be able to find it. He will be like a man trying to look at his eyes, instead of meditating on what is external to him. He pursues his tail. These are the people who do not have kids, and if they do, then they breed them. Now, these are the people who will not give themselves up for the greater good, unless it is self-serving, of course. These are the people that kill civilization while trying to save it. It is here that our fleeting encounter comes to an end. Subscribe to your DB.